So we'll study today what is an arithmetic sequence. So you know that a sequence is just a list of numbers. So here is a list of numbers, and I can label them. I can say, for example, this is U0, this is U1, this is U2, and so on. But you can maybe see that every time I want to compute the next number, I'm always adding 2 to the previous one. So there is always a difference of 2 between two consecutive numbers. So the difference between the number labeled n+1, which is like, for example, this one, and the number labeled n is always 2. This is called a common difference. Why common? Because it's always the same number. If your sequence is like that, like you always obtain the next number by adding always the same common difference to the previous one, it's called an arithmetic sequence. The recursive formula for it, is going to be that if you want the next number, you have to take the previous one and add your common difference, which is called R. For example, you can call it with any letter you want. But if you want to build the sequence, you have to know the first number. Here it's U0 and it's 0. It can start at U2 or U3, and it can be any number. And the common difference can, of course, be any real number. This is your recursive formula. Your explicit formula, if I want to compute U18 without having to compute all the previous ones. So your explicit formula is going to be, I want UN. I want UN. So I started from U0. And if it's U18, for example, I started from U0 and I added the common difference 18 times. Okay, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and so on, until 18 times. Be careful, because if you don't start from U0, for example, you have to really be careful about the number of times you are adding the common difference to get to that number. You can check that on an example if you want. The sum of the terms, when you add the terms of a sequence, it's called a series. So this is an arithmetic series. So I'm adding the terms from U0 to UN, U0 plus U1 plus and so on plus UN. And we'll denote this by a sigma, which is an S in Greek, from K equals 0 to K equals N of the UK. This will be, capital N is the number of terms in your sum times the first term in your sum plus the last term in your sum divided by 2. This will give you the sum of the terms from 0 to N. The limit of this sequence, the limit is what happens when N gets bigger and when N, like when you compute a lot of numbers here towards infinity, what happens to the terms? So the limit, if you keep adding a positive number here, so if your common difference is positive, then the limit, when n gets towards infinity of your sequence is going to be infinity, because you add 2 and 2 and 2 and you get bigger and bigger numbers. If your R, your common difference is negative, then the limit of your sequence when n gets towards infinity is going to be negative infinity, because you subtract numbers and you get a negative number, which is bigger and bigger, but negative. Of course, if your common difference is equal to 0, then you get a constant sequence and all the terms, so you are adding 0 every time. It means you don't change the value of your first term. So every term is equal to u0 and your limit is u0. If you want to test if a sequence is arithmetic or isn't, then you compute this difference, and either it's constant, and the result of it, constant means you get a number, and that number isn't, there is no n left in that number, it's independent from n. Then your sequence is arithmetic, and the result is your common difference. If it's not constant, means if it depends on n, then your sequence is not arithmetic.